Polymarket just made one of the most aggressive repricing moves we've seen in the past few weeks on the US-Iran strike market. And if you're only looking at the number and not thinking deeper about what it represents, you're already trading emotionally. The March 31 contract is now sitting around 60% yes, which means the market is effectively saying there is a greater than even probability of a direct US strike on Iran within that time frame. And that is not a small statement. When geopolitical contracts move this fast, especially into majority probability territory, you have to ask a much more important question than, is this scary? You have to ask, is this correctly priced? Because prediction markets are not news feeds. They are probability mechanisms driven by liquidity, psychology, and reaction speed. And historically, markets overshoot during fear cycles far more often than they underreact. So let's slow this down and analyze what's actually happening instead of reacting to the headline like everyone else on Twitter. First, look at the structure of the order book. We're seeing buyers aggressively stepping up at 59, 60, 61 cents. And that tells us traders are willing to pay a premium for escalation risk right now. But willingness to pay does not equal statistical correctness. It simply reflects urgency. Now, urgency can be driven by real intelligence, but it can also be driven by narrative acceleration. And the media cycle around US-Iran tensions right now is accelerating fast. So the next step is comparison. I don't guess on these markets. I run them through the same structured analyzer I use to evaluate Polymarket contracts consistently. It compares escalation tier history, deterrence incentives, historical strike frequency, proxy behavior patterns, and relative pricing against similar geopolitical markets over time. And what's interesting here is the model is flagging this 60% yes price as potentially inflated, leaning around 62% confidence toward no, based on structural inconsistency. Why? Because a direct US kinetic strike on Iranian soil is a top-tier escalation event, and historically, the US has avoided direct soil strikes absent a very clear triggering catalyst like confirmed mass casualty events or undeniable attribution. Instead, what we've consistently seen is indirect escalation. Proxy targeting in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, sanctions, cyber measures, covert responses. Controlled pressure without crossing that highest threshold. When you map that behavioral pattern against the current 60% pricing, you start to see a disconnect. Now, could this be different? Absolutely. Geopolitics evolves. But probability pricing should reflect structural behavior, not emotional spike velocity. And when you compare this contract to previous similar tension markets, many of which traded between 5% and 20% until concrete troop movement or confirmed strike prep, 60% begins to look like fear compression rather than objective modeling. Another factor here is liquidity stacking. Large buyers stepping in above fair historical range can create artificial anchoring, where new traders assume if it's 60%, it must be likely. But that's herd reinforcement, not independent analysis. This is exactly why I don't treat majority pricing as truth. I treat it as crowd opinion. And crowd opinion during breaking geopolitical news is often distorted by availability bias and worst-case scenario amplification. The real edge comes from stepping back and asking, what would have to be true for 60% to be justified? Would we need confirmed military mobilization? Clear strike authorization? Direct intelligence leaks? Because without those catalysts, deterrence logic still dominates, and deterrence logic historically suppresses direct soil escalation. That doesn't mean a strike is impossible. It means the threshold is extremely high, and high threshold events should not casually trade above 50% unless the catalyst is undeniable. So the real question here isn't, are tensions rising? They are. The question is, has the escalation threshold been crossed? And from a structural standpoint, it hasn't. at least not yet. This is why structured probability analysis beats emotional reaction every time. When headlines spike, traders rush. When traders rush, prices move. And when prices move too far, that's where edge forms. I don't react to fear spikes. I analyze them. And in this specific case, unless we see a clear trigger event that materially changes the escalation tier, this 60% pricing looks more like volatility than inevitability. That's the difference between trading narratives and trading probabilities.